right, good evening. How's everyone? All right, so we're humbled. I'm John, it's my brother Ron. We're humbled that you've come tonight, and I guess, interesting format, figured maybe we start with our history of how we got started, and just as you have questions along the way, just ask. We'll just make it a conversation. We're all at a bar together having a beer and just telling stories. So does that sound like a good plan? All right? Okay. So we get asked a lot, again, how you got started, and in my case, so let's even go back. So we have four brothers, four of us total. So we have two younger brothers that are twins. 46, Ron's almost 50, and then our two other brothers 50. Are 45.
But thanks.
And our parents grew up as, my dad was an interior designer, decorator, but did a lot of construction on the side with my uncle and grandfather, who were both in the construction industry. And they emigrated over from Israel back in the, 70s?
50s and 60s.
Okay, yeah, 70s, actually, from New York to Florida. So the headline is, we always knew that we wanted to be in construction because we grew up on the job sites together. Cleaning, moving bricks and rocks and things, and just a lot of the activity. So as we grew up, as we got older, Ron ended up going to the University of Florida and became a civil engineer. And I said, well, I'll follow into the University of Florida as well. And I studied architecture. And about 2 years into architecture, I said, what I really wanted to do was construction management. But I was already 2 years in, and you couldn't go back. So I figured, let me finish the other 2 years. I got my bachelor's in design, and then I can get a master's for 1 year and a summer. And at the time, my friends in architecture were coming out making $30,000. With the master's in construction, you could make $50,000. So I was a broke college student, so I figured, let me do the master's. And in there, you have to do a thesis. So the thesis effectively became the business plan. And I remember calling my brother, and I'll turn it over to him, sort of what he said. I'm like, hey, I have a job offer for $55,000 at DCC Constructors, who was building Lagorce Palace on the beach, or I could start my own company. And he said,
well, I told him, you have no wife, you have nothing really. You have no family, you have a beat up old car, no car payment. So if you're going to take a chance, now's the time to do it, not later on when you have all these responsibilities. So and worst case, if everything else fails, you just go get that job that you were offered out of school. And so that's what John ended up doing. And just I'll build on that story for a minute. And we're gonna, so we're old guys in the kind of technology, I guess, at this point. But going back to when all of this happened, when John's thesis did become the business plan, he wrote his thesis in 1994. And so 1993 is when Netscape first came out with the browser. And the internet, as we all know it, and now it's ubiquitous, and we have phones and all these other things. But back in 93 is when companies like Coca-Cola and Toyota were trying to figure out for the first time how to build websites. I mean, this is, so that was 93, 94. So it was John was way ahead of his time in terms of coming up with the concept of using the internet to improve construction and to improve the construction process. In hindsight, probably a little too way ahead of his time, because we struggled for a good 10 years before people started to figure out what we were really trying to do, and we started to build a business.
So from that point, one of the first ways that we got started is, so one of the employees, actually the first hire we ever made, is still with us today, James Kaza. He was working at Shands Hospital at the university. So keep in mind, brand new, and to get an internet connection at the time, a T1 connection was super expensive, thousands of dollars every single month for a high-speed connection to our server where we would serve up web pages. So James said, hey, I'm working at the Shands Hospital, and we said, why don't you come join us? So he basically was working two jobs for a while, and on his 486 computer, it wasn't even a Pentium back then, he was able to go ahead and put our first website pages on that computer that others would then access. So we had a little bit of help from the university. Even our professors gave us the light pads, the old projection back in the day. Some of you may not remember. you'd have to write with the markers on the acetate and it would reflect up. So before you had the projection monitors, they had it was like $5,000 a panel that you would put on top of that light machine. And even then, with all the lights being off, it was very dark, right? You couldn't even see the projection unit. But my professor, Stu Schwartz, who I still keep in touch with, allowed us to go ahead and use that during some of our initial meetings where we went around the country, showing people what this eBuilder thing was. And then I used to carry a 100-foot telephone cord because the only way to get internet connection was through a fax machine, right? And all the regular phone systems were these old telex systems. So it was digital, you couldn't plug into it, so you had to find the fax machine. And I remember going into clients' offices, and as they're taking me to the conference room, I'm scanning the hallways in the rooms for where their copy and fax machine were. And I was doing the calculation, is my cord long enough to snake through their office into the conference room to the copy machine or the fax machine where I can plug in and show them what we had, right? So from any questions so far on just going through generating the idea? Yes?
How did you get from construction management to architecture to build a website business?
So I think our background, Ron was a civil engineer, worked for Waste Management, and since we knew we wanted to do something in construction because that's where our parents came from, this notion, as Ron said in '93 of the browser, I mean, thinking back, I think of like Marty Peronic at the time. He's the first one who showed me a web address, and I was so blown away. I couldn't compute. We went into the computer lab, into the basement, and he says, "Here, watch this, 10.2.0.56," and up comes, the MTV website. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, how are we seeing all these pictures? And I was just so fascinated, and I got hooked at that point of how, so I love technology, and I figured there's a problem in construction of people not being able to communicate, so that's how it all came together, and then...
Just build, that really was John hit the point there, is that he was into technology, wasn't a programmer. None of us are software developers or anything, but John was super into technology, and as a hobby and messing around with, I remember a Commodore 64 early on, and then a Mac, and various computers, and then in college he had the opportunity to marry up when he was doing his master's thesis, and one of his professors asked him to help with some technology. So he married sort of the hobby and the passion of technology with this desire to do where we thought we were going to be in the construction business. That's how it all kind of came together. So John starts the company in '95, and then, based on what we had talked about, and fast forward kind of 3 years. And it was really like the idea, and people that read about the idea really thought this is awesome, and you need to go out and start a company, and people are just going to buy this stuff like hotcakes, and everything you're going to live happily ever after. And so 3 years later, John never had a paycheck, hadn't drawn a paycheck. So that whole being broke and everything, he was living it. He actually, people would ask him to speak at a variety of engagements because this was such an interesting and new field in construction. So nobody wanted to buy what we were selling, but people wanted to hear about what was happening in technology. This is just an interesting side story. They would invite John to speak somewhere, pay him $1,000 and pay his airfare and all this stuff. He'd take all that money, he'd buy his airfare on his credit card, take the money that they gave him for his expenses, pay his rent, buy food, and that's how he lived for 3 years. So 3 years comes around, and there are some customers, and there are people using the system, and it's 1998, and John and I started talking, and of course he and I had been talking, I was in the background still at Waste Management, and John kind of said, hey, come on over and help me, and one thing led to another. We decided to partner up and kind of move the company forward. So we get in there. I got in there in '98. 99 was the height of the dot-com boom, 99 and 2000. So at that time, every company that had internet, anything, dot-com anything, if you had any of that stuff going on, people were talking about these crazy valuations, and people were talking about companies that they had no customers, They had, I mean, nothing, in what you would consider a company, they had nothing. They had none of the ingredients, and they were getting valued at 50 million, 100 million, and we were just sitting in Gainesville, Florida, minding our own business and scratching our heads and wondering, you know, how the hell is this supposed to work? You know, and we had no funding. So we decided in '99 we're going to go out and raise a little bit of money. So we talked to some traditional VCs and private equity and so on, and we had one of the magazines in the construction industry is called the Engineering News Record, and it's basically the Wall Street Journal in the construction industry. Kind of everybody reads it, and so we had been written up many, many times. We've gotten awards from there. John got an award as a Newsmaker of the Year, which is a very high award that they give to 10 or 20 people in a year are nominated for doing these dramatic things in construction. So we were written up a lot. They kind of had heard of us. They wanted to make an investment, and the magazine was owned at the time by a company called McGraw-Hill, or if you've heard, a big publishing company. And so we ended up getting an investment from McGraw-Hill in February of 2000. So 99, big dot-com craziness. We said we need to get some money, raised a little bit of money, and literally 3 months after we raised the money, the whole market fell apart, and the dot bomb, the crash of internet companies. And at that point in time, if you had E in your name, if you had .com anywhere around you, if you were doing anything related to the internet, you could not, people wouldn't take your phone call, you couldn't sell anything to anybody. And at the height of the .com, we were talking with Ortez earlier, there were something like 200 companies that were doing what we were doing. It's a very crowded space in just the construction industry. And within a year or so, they were down to 10 companies. All those companies that raised all that money went out of business. And so that was a turning point for us. We did not spend the bulk of the money that we received. So we had the money in the bank, which was nice. It wasn't a ton of money, but we had that feeling like at least we're not going to go out of business at any minute. And then we also had McGraw-Hill as sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval at the time. So when we did talk to customers, and they said, "Who the hell are you?" and why would this company even be here 2-3 years from now? We'd say, "Well, we're a McGraw-Hill company," and that became another turning point. And maybe you pick it up from there.
Yeah. So just by show of hands, how many are in the room here are in the software business or interacting at some level with software from a business? So one of the early things that I did wrong is. And I think at the time, I think before you joined, right, there were maybe 10 people, but I was focused on sales, and everybody else was developing the product. And most companies who develop product, software companies, are in love with the product. So one of the things, just to back up a bit, is the way that we got connected together in ways is I went back and said, "Hey, I hired a consultant." Consultant said, "We need to go and raise some money and take this thing public." Right? But the first thing you have to do, John, he said, is you got to get money from your family, because you can't get money from other people, because they're going to say, "Well, did you put money in?" "Yeah, my family put money in." "Okay, well then you're serious, I'll put money in." So the first person I went to was my brother, right? So we've always worked very well together. My brother's great with numbers, he's an amazing operator, and I've always, he's pretty good at sales too, but I really love the sales side. So we've always worked well and sort of yin and yang in that perspective. And he looked at that and said, "Hey, if you do what this consultant's telling you to do, you're going to go broke. All that you've worked for, you'll have nothing, and that consultant's going to walk away with the $20,000 retainer that he's been getting every single month." So he came on board, and from there we went forward. And then coming up to the McGraw-Hill example, so they invested money, and then of course we know what happened shortly after, right? The dot bomb and the bust. So then we were faced with another decision, which is how do we retain the existing revenue that we have? And we learned a lot about the customer service aspect. And I remember, Ron, you saying, like, we need to forget about new sales. We need to make sure we keep our existing customers, because software is a service, right? We're getting that monthly. At the time, we were charging monthly as opposed to annually. So we double backed, and we literally would ask them, "Hey, why have you been paying all this money all this time? Right? What value you're getting from the system?" And people would tell you. And they were so happy we were even asking that question We developed bond and rapport with these folks even more than we had, and we just made sure we kept them as clients. I think that was a key turning point to allow us to stay through the tough times. Would you say?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know one of the things we were going to talk about today, just like successes, failures, lessons learned, and that point in time was a couple of very important lessons learned for us, which even to this day, I meet a lot of companies, and I get to interact with a lot of folks, and I see so many companies that don't understand a couple of these basic things. So the first is the concept of just listening to the customer. And so in 2000, here we are, .bomb, all these companies around us. I mean, it's pretty scary. We were a small company, and we're looking around us, and all our competitors that had raised, some of them raised $200-300 million, are just falling off the map, and we're like, oh my God, we're gonna be next. So in order to make sure that that didn't happen to us, we first started to internalize. We're like, oh, this is gonna happen to us. You could start sitting around and you can dream up all this bad stuff in your mind of what could happen. Oh my God, that happened over there, that's gonna happen to us too. Oh, did you see that those people canceled that? They're gonna cancel our service. So what we ended up doing, instead of sitting there and just internalizing it, is we literally went and started talking to our customers, and we would just, like John said, we asked these basic questions. Why do you give us money? I mean, we wouldn't exactly say it like that, but basically that was the question. Why are you paying us money? What is it that we're doing that has any value to you? And lo and behold, they would tell us one thing after another, and they'd give us all this information, and that is like golden nuggets of information. If you're building a business, you could turn that around, and that's how you sell other customers, by just understanding why the customers you have bought from you in the first place. And when you're selling technology early on, sometimes your customer is more visionary than you are, even though you want to think you're visionary, but they figured out something and why you have value sometimes before you did. So that was one thing, and then the other is that John mentioned is the point of customer service. So the software business prior to this whole SaaS kind of evolution that we've gotten to in cloud and selling software as a service, before that you would buy prepackaged software, and the software provider, the publisher, would get the bulk of their money up front. So you'd buy $100,000 worth of licenses, and they write a check for $100,000, you get all that money up front, and then you pay $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 a year for maintenance. In that model, the companies, the software companies, are conditioned to just do everything they possibly can to get that first check, because that's where all the money's at. It's not about they don't care so much about getting the $10,000 a year after that. It's just, let me get the $100,000, because if I have the 100, I can keep building my business and keep growing my business. The SaaS business, which is software as a service with cloud, and now everybody's doing it, but we were very, very unique at that time. There was not a lot of people doing that in the 90s. But what that business requires is you have to earn your keep, and at the time we were getting paid every month. So every month we started to do things like we'd watch if people were using our software every month. We built tools to monitor if people were using it, because we knew if they're not using it, they're eventually going to cancel. So today there's this whole customer success business, and there's software to do all this stuff, and we were just doing it at the time out of necessity, because we didn't want to lose our customers. So we learned a whole lot of stuff about how to be a good service business. I talk a lot about in our company, we're more like a restaurant than we are a software company. It's all about the service, it's the experience. It's not the feature per se, and that has been a lesson that's paid dividends for us all these years. It still does.
Any other questions on the customer service before we talk about the next chapter, which is really focus? Yes.
Kind of going back all the way to the beginning, because I feel like a lot of people have ideas and say like, oh, I have this great idea, but you obviously executed on that idea. What was sort of like the first thing you did where you could recommend for somebody who says, oh, I have this great idea to sort of do, to turn that into something, a product or reality?
So there's a few ways to hit that. So for the idea of what is the problem that the industry had? And I think growing up in the industry, I sort of had a little bit of a head start on what the problem was. So I gave a lot of those insights to a person that I met at school at the time as well, that we originally, he was my partner, and after a couple of years left the company. But he, along with James, first guy we hired, developed, you know, the concept of the product. I mean, I sort of sketched it out and then they built it. And then the other part is really the execution. You've heard the comment, people say you could have the best product in the world, but if nobody knows about it, you're not going to be able to sell it. So a lot of it, the execution for me was picking up the phone, which was petrifying at the time, but I don't think I knew any better. I just picked up the phone. You know, Ron talked about Engineering News Record, which was the, you know, I call it the Time magazine, you know, the Wall Street, you know, the construction industry, 400,000 distribution a week. And it was unheard of to just call up the editor of that magazine to say, hey, you need to write about us. But I did, and I remember calling saying, hey, you're writing about, you know, Winter Park Construction, an Orlando construction company, about a brochure online of the internet. I said, that's not what it's about. It's about a project management information system to track cost and you know, all the money and all the responsibilities around a project. And Judy Schreiner, who Ron and I still keep in touch with today, she's like, she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She's like, I need you to come up to New York. And from there, that started a lot of the articles that were being written and gave us a little bit of that momentum. So I think those, from my perspective, were two things on the execution side. You have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I'd add, it's a good question, and I think depending on the kind of idea that you're trying to execute on, if you have an idea to build a piece of software, I mean, it is really hard to go out and, unless you have a lot of money, to go out and start a software company and you know, build the software and then go out and try to sell it, figure out the product market fit. I mean, so that's all hard to do, but a great way to do that is to find something in that industry, to get started in that industry, to consult, let's just say, in the business that, you know, maybe it's, you want to create software for a certain particular industry. You go out and you start working with those clients in a consulting capacity, and you get income right away, and you also get access to the customers that you're maybe going to sell some software to, and then from there you get a little bit of money, and then you can kind of go from there. I also think if you're trying to do some idea that's technology related, find a partner who is a technologist. So. It's a yin and yang thing, and you need, you know, that's a key element of any technology company. There needs to be the technical person, and early on. So if you have someone who's technical and then someone who's sort of everything else, and you go out and you get some consulting work, and you kind of get some revenue that way, you get some customers that way, and then in the background, you know, nights and weekends, you can start building an application. And you can kind of do it that way. So that's a way to do it without raising a bunch of money, and you know, which is a different approach, which also works. But that approach is more, it's a riskier approach, and it's more risky for the entrepreneur. That kind of approach, in my opinion.
So what was tougher, convincing a potential client that, look, well, you have to embrace the technology, you have to embrace the internet, you have to embrace online, everything, you know, move them into an online world, or this software can solve your problems better than your whatever solution you have. I mean, I'm guessing you had both challenges. What was tougher?
I'll hit it from this perspective. Initially, we were trying to convince people, here's why this great technology is going to work for you. And over time, you know, Doug was in the audience, who knows a lot of friends that we know on the sales side. You know, we got introduced to the Sandler sales and other methodologies of sales to say we're going to help people discover that they have a need, a problem that we could solve, a solution that we have for them. So I made a lot of mistakes early on by doing the show up and throw up demonstrations. Have you ever had to sit through those? And I could have a great demo for an hour, and I can show you 500 features of the software, but all Ortez has to be in the back of the room, and all he has to find is one thing that our software can do, and the minute we say can do it, then he's like, oh, well, it's not going to work for us then. right? Instead of asking a lot of questions and understanding what are the problems that you have today, what are you trying to solve, right? And if your pain is big enough, the doctor analogy, because our brother's a doctor, is the one we use all the time. It's very obvious when people walk into the emergency room or they get in a car accident and you break your arm, that person is coming in crying. So that the pain is very obvious and you have to fix it. If you have a headache and the doctor doesn't come and prescribe right away and say, well, let's do brain surgery, right? They're going to ask 1,000 questions because that's not so obvious. So that's what we learned over the years is let's ask a lot of questions, and that will help the client discover that we could be a fit, as opposed to in the early day is, let me convince you why this cool software with a bunch of clicks and buttons and fancy interface can solve your problem.
And early on too, and that didn't work, right? Early on we had the added challenge of the internet was new, and if any of you are involved in any way, even on the periphery, or know anything about construction, construction's technologically laggards, and they're skeptics in the construction industry, generally speaking. Like, so no matter what you tell them, they're trying to figure out what's not true about it, right? And so we would go and say, here's a software, here's an application, show them a demo, and they would back all the way up and say, well, how do we see this? Oh, it comes on the internet. What is this internet? Who pays for the internet? They'd think like we're trying to sell them this is a backdoor way to make them buy the internet. That literally would happen in meetings. And then we'd have a whole 45-minute discussion about the internet instead of talking about what we're trying to sell. So that was way back in the day.
Yeah, but let's face it, even probably 5 years ago, and I won't name the airport authority, but a huge, mega airport authority, and we came in, and Ron happened to be in town, or he and I rarely travel together, but I'm like, hey, I'm going to this meeting, and you should come. It's a big client, a big opportunity. They weren't our client yet. And during the meeting, these people are asking, again, very basic questions, and this is like 15 years into the business, and we're 23 years in now. And he walks out of the room, he's like, did they just ask the same questions? Like, we figured that out 15 years ago. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I can't believe it. And again, it just cements that we have all this software that could do so many things, but if we can get 80% of our client base using even 20% of the software versus 20% of the client base using 80% of the features, we're going to have better results at the end of the day. Yes?
How did the initial hunch or identification of the problem evolve over time, over, say, the first 5 years, the next 5 years, in terms of the actual product or service when you initially thought?
So that's actually a good evolution into the focus concept. I think when we first started, it was let's just communicate pictures and documents on the system so people could just consume information, be more informed, so they can make better decision making. I think over time, it very much more through our clients into, hey, we're talking about budgets and financial information and ball in court, what they call ball in court. I have a question, you need to give me an answer. When are you going to give me that answer back? So our clients help us evolve it into a true management system as opposed to a tracking rear view mirror. It's more forward looking. But
the listening to the clients is kind of was part of the evolution. Just asking them, what is it you need versus what are we giving you? Yeah.
So for quite some time, we were bumping along at around maybe a tad under $1 million a year in revenue, and we couldn't scale. And this whole, I think you would come in and said, hey, I just read this book. Was it about Documentum, right, at the time? This company went and they were doing just like us, $1 million a year, and they were serving all these industries. So in our case, if you were an architect, contractor, owner, if you worked for an airport or higher education or a school district or a Facebook, a technology company, we didn't care who you were, we would try to sell you eBuilder. You needed a web camera on your product.
If you had money, you were in our target market.
Right, okay. So, well, guess what? How do you scale that? It's impossible, right? How do you tell the same person you just hired at a low salary because you can't afford it to just make cold calls all day long? And the minute Ortez has an objection, well, he's in the aerospace business, and you're in the higher education business. Your objections are going to be different. So he came in one day, and this is one of the few arguments we had, and we really never had, and we could probably count them on our hands. And That really just comes from the respect that we have for each other. I hit a wall and I said, look, I need help, right? And he helped us take it to the next level. It's always been that way, which is why our relationship has worked. So when we got together and said, okay, we're going to focus just on healthcare, we're just going to focus on owners. So we picked a role, the owner role, we picked one vertical in healthcare, and we said any other lead that comes in, we're going to ignore. So can you imagine, we're barely taking a salary, right? And he's I'm like, even now, I'm like, what are you, crazy? Right? How can we turn away business? But I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and back in those days, we got probably 300 leads a month, 300 or 400 leads a month. So, and we had, at that time, we had a couple of owner clients. We started to realize this is where it's at. We thought this is going to be the right move for us to go after these owners. And so we just said, you know, we're going to ignore all those leads. And just to tell the Documentum story real quick. So do you guys know, has anyone heard of Documentum? Has anyone heard of VMware? Yeah, VMware. So Documentum was bought by a company, and that company was ended up by eRoom, I think, and that company ended up being bought by VMware. It is a mega big part of VMware now for document management, and it's horizontal in many industries. So this back in the 90s is doing like $1 million or $2 million in revenue, and it could not grow. And they were selling document management. Think of like SharePoint or whatever. And they decided, they had one client that was a pharmaceutical company. So they said, we are gonna stop everything else, and we're just gonna become the ultimate document management solution for pharmaceutical companies that are getting FDA drug approvals, which is like super narrow, and most people would think, oh my God, that's not a big enough, we're not gonna have a business and all this stuff. So, but they did that, they sent their developers, they had the one client, they learned everything there was to know about pharmaceutical FDA approval process. Literally inside of 2 years, they were the market leader. They had every single pharma company that did FDA approvals. You just bought that software. You didn't even think about anything else. They were able to charge 5 times more than anyone else. And then once they knocked down that market, they said, okay, what's next? And then they went to another and another. So they were hovering at $1 million or $2 million for 7 years, 6 years. And that one move turned them into a $10 million company within 2 years. And a few years later, they were a $100 million company, and then they sold for a whole lot of money. So that sounded really good to us. You know, that's what we wanted to do. But it was super scary. And in the beginning, and we did argue about it because we were like, okay, we're getting all these leads. What are we going to do with the lead? I'm like, just ignore them. Because if you're in sales, your most precious commodity is your time. And if you have 400 leads, and only out of the 400, like 2 of them are in your market, maybe you can make some money with, but you're gonna spend your time talking to 398 of them, and they're gonna tell you to come out and visit, and they're gonna tell you that maybe it could work for their solution, and you're just gonna spin your wheels over and over again, and you're not gonna sell anything in the end. So it was really hard to do, and especially because at that time, we had no money. You know, it's not like we had millions of dollars, so let's experiment on this thing. But we did it, and what the market we picked, we said we're going to go after hospitals that are spending a certain amount on construction. So we came up with all these parameters. We came up with 800 targets. And we said we're only selling these 800 targets. And that took more than a year of beating into everybody's head that we're really serious about this. We're not going to, focus on healthcare and these 800 targets until the next cool thing shows up. We're actually going to stay focused. So we'd have, people would make fun of me because I'd have a salesperson come in and say, oh my God, I have this great opportunity. It's a school, and they heard about us, and they love what we have, and they say if we just show them what we're doing, they want to buy. And I would be like, okay, how many hospitals have we sold? Oh, 2? Oh, great. We have 798 left. Go sell 798 hospitals. Then come tell me about that lead. So we would just be like crazy about it. And it's funny now because in our company, there's a lot of people that are crazy like that. I see other people saying that when somebody comes and says, I want to try a new market, we're like, wait a minute, have we done this market yet? Oh, no? Okay, well, go back and do that, and then come talk to me. So
the question was, how can we make selling to healthcare scalable and then that knowledge transferable? So that brings into the whole notion of the sales process. And many of the mistakes that I personally made was, again, the show up and throw up when it came to the demo. And when you're dealing with software, sort of that invisible ether, what will happen is they don't want to tell you no to your face because people are non-confrontational by design. So instead, they would, okay, John, we were going to buy your software but didn't have that feature. So my thing would be, let's go back to James Kaza. Hey, James, we lost because we didn't have that feature. So he'd work all through the weekend, maybe take 2 or 3 weeks or a month. He'd create that feature. We'd go back to the client and say, I got that feature. And they say, oh, okay, but what about that feature? Oh, okay, no, we didn't have that. So one day I met Ron introduced me to a sales coach that changed my life. He's since retired, Bernie Cronin. And he said, John, you remember when you were a little kid? I'm like, yeah, where's he headed with this? He's like, when you're 5, 6 playing with your brothers, you remember like playing cops and robbers? Well, yeah, I guess so. He's like, you remember what you guys did when you played cops and robbers? I'm like, no, what? He's like, you pretended. I said, oh, yeah, okay. He said, well, that's what you need to do with your clients. So when a client would say, you know what, I would have gone with you, or I would go with you, but you don't have the ability to analyze cash flow. Ortez, let me ask you a question. Let's pretend I told you that I actually have cash flow. I could have it for you tomorrow. What would you want to do as the next step? Okay? And now he's boxed in, because if he's truthful, he's going to get really excited and say, you have it? Let's do it. Okay? But usually they're not truthful, and what do they say? You could just tell the body language on their face. So, the whole notion was, I want to get to as many no's as I can, because the more no's I get through, I'm going to get to a yes. So all the people, these 400 leads that were coming through, and I thought I was real busy, I got a lot of action with people that are never going to buy anything, and I spent all this time doing demos. Now I had all this free time to focus on the people that really were going to buy from me. So we took that system to all the people in our company. So the sales process, it's a process, it's a methodology to make it scalable and transferable. And that, I think, would you say, helped us really get to the next level as well? That
was basically the really, we figured out the focus, we had the good service, we had a good product, but this is now about 10 years into the business. And we joke around, sometimes it's the lost decade, because it's like trying to figure out what we were doing. But at the end of the first 10 years is when we figured out sales. And like John says, the sales process and marketing process. And doing that is so starting around then, around 2004, applying this process that we developed and learned from sales coaches and other things, we started to grow about 25 to 30% a year in and year out till this day. So we're 13, 14 years already of that high growth, and it gets harder and harder, obviously, when you're 60, 70, 80, $100 million growing 20, 30%, we're like it's more than what we did in the first 15 years. We're adding on to the company every year. So that phase of growth has really been all about, it's pure execution. It's all about execution, and it's been sales and marketing that's kind of propelled us.
How are we doing so far? Is this a good pace? Is this helpful? I think when you look at, and I'll pick on the Me Too movement or any of these movements of how, let's pick on Hollywood, the way Hollywood acts, what you read in the newspaper. And I think of the way Ron and I, have acted as we went through. People look at the leaders of the organization. What people tell us, hey, you guys are hard workers, you come in early, you stay late, you're traveling on the road, you care about people. And other people then copy that mentality. So, Ortez and I, over dinner, we were talking about the culture. And other people have asked us, how do you maintain that culture? So I think that's been an important part of our success, and it's allowed people to stay with us throughout the years. And some people have left, you're going to get that. But I think through some of the tougher times that we had, people still believed in what we were doing and knew that we cared about them. So they were able to care back. And I think that's, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but we see that a lot of times we don't see that in some of the clients where we implement software, and the way that their lack of not so much lack of their lack of caring, you can tell, and it's a reflection of the rest of their organization. I think it does have a longer term impact.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question related to that. We've shared a lot about how you adapted during times to ask the right questions or get no's and build guesses from there. Personally, I see those as external adaptations to market. Internally, as a company, what were some of those challenges, not necessarily with product market fit, like as a company, as a startup, that you started seeing that 20 years now, looking back, what were some of your big wins internally to maintain culture or some other of those?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a few really big ones. So I joined in 2002, I joined a group called Vistage, which is like a CEO peer group. And I'm still involved in that. So I have monthly meetings. It's like, I call it therapy for business owners kind of thing. But, we go and we learn from each other, compare notes and stuff. And I learned, and they have good speakers. And so I've learned a lot from the speakers there. But early on, there was a speaker, and he talked about the importance of, you may be excited about growing your company and revenue and income and all the numbers and all that kind of stuff. Your people don't care about that stuff. And especially nowadays, it's like millennials that come out of school that look for a job. They're not looking for the company that has the highest operating income. Like they don't care about that. They care about doing meaningful work and being around people that they want to be around, kind of thing. So we didn't really change the business, but we changed how we talked about the business and how we explained what we were really doing. And we went from saying we sell construction management software and we're trying to grow a business and blah, 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 to we're really changing we're transforming the construction industry. And by transforming the construction industry and making it better, faster, cheaper, we're giving our clients the ability to take those resources, the money that they spend on inefficient construction, and apply it to society's higher priorities. So if it's healthcare, we're helping improve healthcare in this country because the money that they spend on inefficient construction, they're spending on better healthcare for people, or improving education, or with our government clients, improving infrastructure when you see bridges collapsing, and that kind of a thing. That change has had a profound impact on our whole company. And if you talk there's 300 employees in our company, and you ask them what they do, you're not going to get, they might tell you I'm a QA engineer, I'm a support rep or whatever, but they will talk about how we've helped save people from cure cancer, for example, or how we've helped more teachers have books in their classrooms because the money that we've saved, these institutions. So that's one big thing, big win. And then another, this isn't a win, but this is a tough lesson learned, I guess, is the people. People are everything. It's like so cliche. It's all about the people. Yes, it is very true. And the bigger you get, the leadership, the people that manage parts of your business are the difference between your success and failure. And the absolute hardest thing, it's still hard, is as a business, as a leader, you figure out that people that helped you get to a certain place, they're not going to take you any further. And you have to make a really hard decision and you're loyal to those people because they got you there. They got you somewhere to a certain point, and now you have to tell them, look, I need to move you out of the seat. I need to bring somebody in from outside, or I need to move you into a different role. Some people end up leaving the company. Some people were successful in keeping in the company. But that has been a big win, ultimately. Like when you look at our team today, our executive team is about 4 years old. So even though the company's 23 years old, and this is really this is the third time I've had to change the executive team. This is the third time now. And I've talked to other people that have built billion-dollar companies, it happens again and again. So anyway, it's a lesson learned, but it's a win at the end of the day, is being able to do it and keep the people, try to not lose the people in the process.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and sort of the last stage, if you will, is we would sit around on the weekends, and we like to go boating and things like that, and travel together for work, and we take out what's going to happen if the next big company or a competitor gets merged with another company, and we're going to get left behind, and all the time and equity that we built up in eBuilder is going to go away. And at this point, the company was doing extremely well, especially the last 5 years. So we were doing well, but you still, only the paranoid survive, like Andy Grove wrote in his book. So that then started the process, to Ron's point of, one, we got to build a great management team. And Ron really led the journey to figure out, okay, what is an opportunity for us? And I'll, maybe pitch it back to him to just talk about, to me it was fascinating to watch, and I was a part of it, but he really led this effort and really got us to sort of the exit that we have today, and then we could end off by what we're doing today, moving forward, and what the future looks like.
So, so a lot of people always are interested in how do you sell a company for $500 million, and how does all that happen? And the first thing is, John makes a joke with a lot of people, we're the 23-year overnight success. So it doesn't happen fast, like it just takes time. But of course, as John said, we got to a point where we started thinking, where's the industry going? And we have our lives and our net worth and our everything tied up in this business, and we want to make sure it continues forward, and we want to make the right decision. So what I started to do probably 5 years ago, maybe a little more, is I started talking to the investment community. So that's actually, if you're further along, if you're early on, when you're first starting out, it's one thing, but the minute you get a little traction, this is actually a good tactic. I would talk to all the investors. I got to know the senior people in the very large private equity firms, and I would tell them right out of the gate, I'm not selling, I'm not getting an investment, we're not doing any of that stuff, but I don't mind talking to you. And of course, if you meet somebody at a bar, and the first thing they tell you is, I'm never going to talk to you, I'm never going to give you my number, all you try to do is talk to them even more. So I had all these people talking to me even more and more and more. But for 5 years, I built relationships, and I learned. They learned about me, I learned about them. What's very interesting is the big private equity firms and the venture capitalists, when they call you and they have these conversations with you, a lot of them record the phone calls. Literally they're recording the call, and then at the very least they're taking notes. So they ask you questions like, how are you doing on revenue this year? What are you going to do next year? How much are you growing? How many people do you have? And they write all that down or record it. And so I was doing this I would talk to these people once or twice a year. Over 5 years, some of these people got to realize, holy shit, what he told me 5 years ago, he said in 5 years he was going to do X, and he's really doing X 5 years later. So I built up credibility and trust with some of these investors, all the while telling them we're not going to do anything. Knowing one day we were going to do something, of course, they know that too. And so the ones that learned about us and started to realize that they realized we're very good executors, because we were very predictable and everything we said was actually coming true. So when we finally decided, there came a point where John and we saw this market consolidating, and we're like, we think we want to sell a portion of the company and work with an investor to kind of maybe take it to another level, to 200 or 300 million. So we kind of went through a process. We hired an investment bank, lawyers, and all kinds of advisors and stuff. We were a big company, so in the software world, so it attracts different types of investors, and it did attract a lot of attention. And then went through a process, and we actually had a lot of interest in the company. We had 70 private equity firms that wanted to do something with us. And even at that point, this is like a few months before we actually did the deal with Trimble, we didn't think we were going to sell the business. We still thought we're just going to take an investment and kind of go to the next level. So spent the time with these folks. They were very interested. We narrowed down to a group that we said, we're going to let you guys make a bid on our company. And when you have all this, when you do all that work on the front end, the 5 years, build the relationships, prove that you can, that you're executing, then when it actually comes to time to this day, everybody was just falling over themselves wanting to try to invest in eBuilder. It was really crazy. I mean, I still can't believe like how much people were trying to go around the process, and all they wanted was, just an edge over everybody else. So we eventually invited 25 people to bid on the business, and we got 23 offers, which is unheard of also, like to get that many offers. And during that same time, a few strategics, the big, the Oracles of the world and Microsofts, those kinds of, there's a few handful of companies that could invest or buy a company like eBuilder. Trimble came along, and we had a couple meetings with them. Interestingly, Trimble is a $3 billion publicly traded company, and we at the time we're just coming off of doing about 55 million in revenue, so we're 2% of Trimble, and the CEO came and spent like 3 hours with us. That was the second meeting. So we knew, and the bankers were saying like, these guys are really interested in doing something. There's something about you guys, they really want to do something. Excuse me. So from that moment, they got really interested, and then they started to sell us really and say, we're not going to change how you do business. We love what you guys have created. We want you to keep doing this. We have some other businesses we want you guys to run for us. So we just it felt really good, and it's hard to explain, but my gut feeling, I mean, I had all the numbers and had a few other investors that we really liked, but it felt right with these guys, and it actually happened very, very quickly from that moment. So from the time they made an offer until the time we, had the check in the bank account, so to speak, was about 45 days, which is also, very, very quick. But it was the 5 years of building the relationships, getting that. We had the reputation out with the investment community that we know what we're doing and we deliver. And then it was also a lot of preparation. We have an amazing team that on the financial side, there's a lot of detail stuff that when Trimble came in with all of their lawyers and all of their people to look at stuff, we had everything, all the I's dotted, T's crossed, all the information for them, easily accessible. So it's a lot of prep work to get to that point. And it was surprisingly, it went smooth at that end step. One last piece that I'll mention is what kept it moving quickly and what kept it going smoothly was what the bankers call competitive tension. So Trimble was super interested in doing a deal with us, but every time Trimble would say, well, maybe we want to do this instead, and it wasn't even big deal stuff. It was like, we just want another 5 days to look at some information. And anytime they would say that, the bankers would say, okay, well, there's 23 people waiting, so we're just going to tell them to come instead. And Trimble would say, oh, no, okay, never mind. We'll just keep moving forward. So I hear a lot of people say, I'm thinking about getting an investment, or I'm thinking about selling the company, and then you ask them, how many buyers are you talking to? One. If you have one buyer, you have no buyers. How many investors are you talking to? One. It's not good. From the point of view of an entrepreneur, that's like the worst situation you ever want to be in.
So February 2nd, we had what we call our all hands meeting, which was planned, but we typically have them once a month. Was that a Monday or was it a Friday? Friday. And at 9 o'clock, we knew that the release was going to go out on the wire and it was going to be official. And we couldn't tell our employees who it was because of SEC regulations and all that. So if you can imagine it, literally 9 o'clock on the nose, it went out on the wire, and probably, I think it was like 30 seconds in, all of our phones at the executive level started blowing up, on text messages and phone calls as it went out there. So it was very fulfilling. People say, hey, you know, why are you guys continuing to work? Because we don't have to. A few reasons. One, we were able to give $60 million away to our employees, which we didn't have to do that, but everybody in the company got money, even people who started work that day. So, and I remember Ron saying, how could we have a celebration, everyone having a toast, and we had, you know, a big party without everybody being a part of it. And, you know, the stories you hear, dozens of stories of, you know, my grandmother has cancer, now she can get better treatment. You know, my mom's roof's been leaking and I could finally get it fixed. You know, Rich, who said, I wanted to get a house, but I didn't qualify in the credit, and that was a week ago. Now I went back to them and now I qualified and I can buy the house. You know, or you know, my kid can go to the better school at Heritage, which we couldn't afford before. So it was amazing. And now we're just continuing as we grow. You know, a few folks that did really well, we created about 15 millionaires, left the company, and then all of those individuals underneath them now moved up into those roles and they're flourishing. So it gives us tremendous fulfillment and satisfaction to see those individuals prosper and go to the next level. And it allows us to accelerate our vision that we had when we started the company is now Trimble, who are, you know, are wonderful people, and they're really helping us take it to the next level with the reach that they have internationally. And that's really exciting. And we see that it's continuing to be exciting for us, you know, into the years to come. So anything you wanted to add on to that before we end off with any final questions? And
just quickly, I'll say that really was the greatest day of my career, and not because the money, you know, not the money for us, but just we literally had one person after another like crying, coming into our office and crying and tears of joy about all the great stories of things that they could do different and what an impact working at eBuilder is having on their careers and their lives. The best day of my life, best feeling in the world. It was awesome. So
we want to be good stewards of the time. I think they said we'll end right at 8, and then we'll hang around for a little bit of Q&A for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I think is what they had. So thanks very much.
How much do you indulge, and what kept you focused on the build?
Boy, so that's actually a pretty easy one. Again, thanks to Ron. To your point, the success we had, going back to the example of healthcare, where we focused, Ron would always say, if we don't have a plan, so we would sit together every year and say, okay, what's the vision for the next year? What's our 5-year plan? You know, and 5 years out, you know, both personally and professionally. And we said, if we don't have a plan, then anybody who comes to us with an idea, that even if we start to say, hey, that sounds interesting, well, now suddenly we're following their plan because they came to us. So we're naturally very suspect, not in a negative way, but if people come to us with could be the greatest idea, you know, take even our investment. So now we have all this money, and we've never had this money before. So we have to figure out, how is that money going to make money? What are we going to do with it? So we're devising and taking time to figure out what's our plan. So we've had a lot of people come with investment ideas, but if it's not part of the plan we've put together, we've probably passed up a lot of good opportunities, but we tell them, no thanks, it's not part of our plan, and we move on. Because we're going to execute on our plan, and I think it's just writing it down. If I had to summarize, writing down, developing a mission and a vision is really what helped keep this focus.
yeah, and you know, we learned a little bit of that, like going back to spending all this time with these big private equity guys. You know, you see these private equity firms that have billions of dollars, and they're a bunch of really smart people, and they're very, very thoughtful and very focused. They have a thesis. Even though they entertain, they talk to a lot of people about investing. They're really looking for specific things to fill out their game plan and their thesis. That's what the successful people do. And you know, they're not just waiting around for whoever to walk through the door and just invest in the next big thing. So we try to copy that. It's the same sort of focus theory that we do at work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some good folks that you guys have privileged to give the correct process.
Gosh, so there's Good to Great, Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar, which is a David Sandler book, Spin Selling by Neil Rackham, Solution Selling by Michael Bosworth, those are ones for me that come to mind.
I'll give you 3 that I think are pretty good. 0 to 1, Peter Thiel. That's also another thing about this focus and having a market that you could be the leader in. There's a book called The Hard Things about something like The Hard Thing about hard things. It's by Horowitz. Awesome book. Talks about him being the CEO of a technology company and how he had no idea what he was doing, and obviously he's very successful. He's now half of Andreessen Horowitz, big VC. And then a book we give everybody to read at work, a lot of our managers and leaders. This is more applicable to when you start to get a little bit bigger, but The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. This guy, Pat Lencioni, and he has a whole bunch of books, but it's all the same concept, and it's all about building trust and building culture in your company so you could be successful.
And I would add, it's not necessarily a book, but you've heard of Myers-Briggs or the predictive index or the DISC profile, and I took that early in my career. I should have taken it even earlier, but I guess in my late, maybe 23, 24, and I figured out that my profile was someone that, from a sales perspective versus, extrovert versus introvert, and then they have all the profiles of what role you would excel at. So a great manager like Ron, one of the things he's really good at is I want it done now, but I want it done right? Where a salesperson has influence or could talk to anyone in an elevator, but I tend to be short on details a lot of times, but I'll focus on the things that I care about to get the deal in. So he would come behind me and say, okay, let's figure it out. You won that deal, now let's backtrack and figure it out how you won that deal so we can turn it into a process. So figuring out each individual in our company, but for me personally, was very helpful. And as my kids get older, they're still 5, 7, and 8-year-old girls, but once they get a little bit older to understand, I'm going to give that to them so they can start to understand themselves. If each of you are saying, well, what is my fit from what I call the DNA.
At one point you mentioned you guys and 20 other competitors doing similar things, or there's other solutions out there. You look back, your early stage, what keeps you going? What makes you believe that you have a solution that's going to outperform the others? And what to focus on in those times when there's similar things out there, but you believe that you have something different?
I'm going to answer it. If this, I think, is what you're asking, there was a period in time, which is after the .bomb thing happened, where there's all these competitors. We weren't doing all that well. We weren't growing. The market had changed for all the .coms out there, and what kept us going was hearing from our customers. So as we talked about, we literally went out and said, "Why do you buy from us? And what value do we really give you?" And then genuinely hearing from customers how we were really helping them, and we would also ask them, why not buy that competitor's product, or that competitor, or that product over there costs less money? Why wouldn't you just buy that? And we literally asked those questions, and they'd say, well, you don't understand, because you guys have blah, 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 and it's much better than anything else out there, and you think those people can do it, but they can't do it like you. So that kept us going in that time. I think today, what keeps us going today is a whole different thing, where it's always about sort of getting to another level and learning new things, getting to do things that we've never done. Now we're talking about international type of expansion, because Trimble's international. We're talking about some technology that we can marry up between Trimble and eBuilder and offer something to the construction industry that has been talked about for 20 years that nobody's been able to deliver on. So stuff like that keeps us interested, and that's pretty cool to try to go do and whatnot. And then also seeing people develop that's always fun, because you see somebody that started in a certain position and how they've grown, and that as well.
And your mind can play tricks on you too, because the Jim Perino story. This is one of the arguments, debates that we had. which is we just
You hit on like both of them. That's
Right.
it. I think we only had 2 arguments. These are the 2.
We had just received money from McGraw-Hill, so we were going to do like everybody else. We're going to go out and hire a bunch of people and scale up as fast as we can. And McGraw-Hill had invested in 2 or 3, actually 4 other companies. They'd spent millions of dollars with those guys. I think we got $5 million from McGraw-Hill in ad credits that we ended up buying back over the years. And one of the companies that they bought had hired 100 salespeople. So we're going through our process, and like every time we'd hire one, they'd hire 20. And he'd be like, what is it? They could hire 20, we could only hire 1. We must be doing something wrong, right? And we would beat ourselves up. And then a year went by, and the dot-bomb crash happened. That company and all the other companies that McGraw-Hill had invested in except us all went bankrupt. And then guess what? Those 100 people started to call us and said, hey, I got laid off, but I'm looking for a job. And after we interviewed about the 4th or 5th one, we said, okay, now we know how they hired those people so quickly. These people didn't know a thing about sales. They just were picking anybody off the street. So it's very easy sometimes to see what the competitor is doing, and you see maybe our 2 competitors are doing the same thing, doesn't make it right. They just had this idea, they run with it, but they're not listening to their clients, and it turns out that they were going in the wrong direction, or like we used to say, they were running a sprint and we were running a marathon. So a lot of them just ran out of steam and said, hey, we crossed the finish line. It's like, finish line's way over there, and they couldn't have any more money. The VCs wouldn't fund them anymore, and they went away.
Just one thing to add on that. So what your competitors say in the market and what you tell yourself or your employees internally can really mess you up. It can really, really mess you up. And the way to keep yourself straight and sane, listen to your customers. And that, because if your customers tell you you have big problem, listen. And whatever they tell you, listen to them, and you'll be successful. And you'll be happy to know that so many companies that's the most simple, basic thing, such common sense, doesn't get followed a lot.
So, what was your biggest technological challenge, and also was there a big shift in your company when you guys mobile became a big thing, or is that something you guys really,
So I'll work backwards on the mobile piece. We made a mistake initially we used, and again, Ron and I are encoders, but we used a language that allowed it to, we developed it once, and it worked on the Android and the iPhone. So, and iOS, I should say. So intuitively, you're like, oh, that makes sense, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Well, the problem was that technology only allowed both those platforms to operate at, call it 60% of their full capacity. So if you develop natively in iOS, you can have all the latest and greatest, and natively in Android, you could have the latest and greatest. So we ended up with a mediocre mobile application, but I think we lucked out as well because our industry was slow to adopt, and we since recovered and built one that's purpose-built for the iOS and actually rebuilding one for the Android. I think, what would be your suggestion on the first
On the biggest challenge, I think it's a balance always when you're building the company the way we did, where we weren't well funded in the beginning, so we can't throw money at technology, and we had to balance what we spent our money on and where we thought we would be versus where we were. And some of the challenges that we had along the way, the technologies we've had to rewrite the product as the platforms have changed, from .NET, and now we're writing in MeanStack, and we've had to continue to evolve, and those are big investments, and they're not investments that users see. They don't see, it's not a feature or anything, it's all like under the hood stuff. And I think the challenge has always been is finding the right balance. Sometimes we've waited too long. Other times we've not waited long enough. And so sometimes we've spent too much too early thinking something was gonna happen, and then we bought bleeding edge stuff where we shouldn't have. And other times we waited too long, and all of a sudden we're selling our product and we have performance challenges. And you can't, if you're a technologist, that's not the kind of thing where you can just Band-Aid and fix it. So you end up having months, quarters, or a year or 2 or 3 where you're having to go and fix stuff after the fact and deal with the customer churn that comes with that. That's the challenge. And the guys who are helping make those decisions, like it's hard to find the people who have the right balance of business sense and know-how and the technology know-how.
Was there a low point personally throughout the process, and what are we helping you through that?
So the low point, I would say financially, was we didn't have enough to cover payroll, so it happened twice. I think, my parents lent about 10 grand, for about a week, and my parents didn't make a lot of money, so that was like a big deal for them. I was fairly certain I was going to be able to get it back to them. And then one of our clients, Tim Barr, who again I had dinner with in DC probably, 8 months ago, I begged him, hey, can you FedEx the check? Because I was going to give us another. So that was certainly the most stressful because you had 10 people at the time back at work, and they believed in this vision in Gainesville, Florida, in this little condo that we rented, and I'm out on airplanes all day long try to make a go of it. So that was probably the most stressful. There is nothing more stressful than that of how you're going to feed, or at least for me at the time. So that would be good for me.
Yeah, for me, I kind of talked about it, but it was after the .com thing, I really was scratching like people that I looked up to and that I trusted, that cared about me, were like, why are you doing this? Like you need to start polishing up your resume, kind of thing. And that was around when I said, let me go talk to some customers, and that turned it around. But before doing that, I was like scratching my head, and we worked really, really hard back then too. So that's the worst feeling, when you're working really, really hard and you're not seeing any results.
Did you do anything fun, or did you buy anything fun when you sold? Something you just wanted to do?
Yeah, so we get that question asked a lot. So keep in mind, the last 5 years, the company was doing really well. We have the boat, and we have a nice house, and all those. We took nice vacations. So we were fortunate enough to have done that. I think because how we grew up, we grew up with not a lot of money. You're naturally you can't forget where you came from. So I think, and one of the things, again, Ron did is he interviewed a lot of people that made a lot more money than we did in this marketplace. And we had lunch with them, and we had dinner with them. Some people we just cold called. Said, hey, we just made some money, you made a bunch of money, and people were delighted to share. And a lot of them, almost to a T, said, number one, do not stop working. Maybe you don't have to work as hard, but don't stop, because we've been going 100 miles an hour for 23 years. And to just stop, and I personally go back to Simon Cowell, who did an interview on CNN probably maybe a year ago with the guy who runs TMZ. And Simon said, I don't want to just be that dad at my daughter's wedding. So he's all about being relevant. And for him, relevant means continuing to produce shows so that people recognize him. And I always joke, I don't need the fame, but I'll take the fortune. But there is a certain fulfillment that happens in doing what we do, and even coming to do this. I was here at the lab for just doing a panel, and the folks who put it together said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" And we said yes, because we want to give back. So it's fulfilling for us to do that. So you realize pretty quickly it's not about the money. I mean, Ron and I play music. He plays piano and guitar, and I play piano and a little bit of ukulele. I'll end by this. Success for me has been having the freedom and flexibility to do what I want to do when I want to do it, so I can spend time with my family and friends. So the end part is really key. The boat and some of those things allow us to invite people that we care about and we love to spend time with us, because we only have a short amount of time on this earth.
Yeah, no crazy toys after. Yeah.
Okay, we'll start there and then we'll go over it.
Just wondering, it seems like your clients are very large clients, but do you guys see opportunity for disruption for smaller contractors in the construction space? It seems like there's a lot of kind of old economy.
there's definitely opportunity. That's the bigger Trimble vision, and specifically our product is geared towards very large institutions, and our typical client spends $100 million a year on construction or more, and many of our clients spend in the billions. But Trimble even today has other products and developing products that are geared towards the rest of the industry. And this construction is sort of like the last bastion of industry that's ripe for change. I mean, almost every other industry has changed, but because of technology, and there's still a huge opportunity. So it's coming. It's just going to probably take longer than anybody thinks.
And I'll just add, it's a very fragmented industry. So you have your big general contractors at the top, and then the minute you go down to, there's literally millions of firms that are doing a few $1 million, $2, $3, $4, under $5 million, and they're all over the place. They're hard to find. They're hard to market to. So there's just, at least in construction, again, very highly fragmented. Makes it a little bit more difficult.
My question kind of piggybacks on his a little bit. So aside from moving down to targeting like the smaller groups of contractors, where do you think the future of technology and construction is headed overall?
I mean, some talk about artificial intelligence. So that, boy, that has a long way to go as well. But this notion of we have all this data, and we should be able to somehow extract that information, or just in concert with that big data. If we have, Facebook's a client of ours, or big airports are clients. What if, or healthcare is a better example. So we have over 100 healthcare clients. What if we could take all of that data, aggregate it together? We'd have to get our contracts in line. Our clients would have to say, yes, you can anonymize my data. And now when you're building a hospital, you could say, what does an emergency room cost per bed or per square foot in the Miami market? And come up with a number when you're doing your estimates and your budgeting that'll keep you in line from the beginning till the end, instead of now, how do you find that? You're guessing, you're pulling from information. So I think there's some big plays. One more is this whole notion of robotics and laser scanning of existing facilities. I think we're seeing a lot happening in that marketplace, where it can go and assess an existing facility and determine updates of progress without a human ever having to walk the job site. Do you have any?
Yeah, add one other thing is, if you think of construction as a form of manufacturing, it's manufacturing buildings and roads and so on. And in manufacturing, the supply chain has been connected electronically for many, many years. Boeing, when they build a plane, all of the models, the electronic data is all shared all the way down to the entire supply chain. And it's not even close to that happening in the construction industry, and that's of course made manufacturing efficient. So I think there's an opportunity, there's reasons why it's, I won't bore you with the details of why construction hasn't gotten there, but I think construction is ultimately going to get there. And there are studies out there that as much as 30% of every dollar spent in construction is wasted. And construction is a $10 trillion a year business. So $3 trillion a year potentially are being flushed down the toilet. And when you think about, in the United States, we talk about infrastructure is decayed and needs to be improved. And the entire United States, we need like $2 trillion to fix all the infrastructure. So we waste as much money in 1 year as we would need to fix the entire infrastructure of the United States every single year. I mean, it's just crazy. And so I think there's opportunity to fix some of that.
Great. Well, I think that'll do it. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Really appreciate it.